For this lesson, we're going to be looking at our second law that we will be using for non-right angled triangles. So this law is called the cosine law, and it has two variations. And they're the same exact equation, just rearranged. So the first one is when we're solving for a side, and that is c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine of c. And then when we're solving for an angle, we have cosine of c is equal to a squared plus b squared minus c squared over 2ab. So there's two main cases when we use cosine law. In general, if you are unable to use sine law, it's usually cosine law is the way to go. That's the easiest way to approach it, but just to be clear, we have our two different options. So the first one is side angle side. And what I mean by that is when I have two side lengths of a triangle, and I also have the value of the angle in between those two sides. So see here how we have the 11 and 8, and the 37 is right in between. That is a perfect cosine example. So here's how we use this equation. So the first thing we do is we notice it's a non-right angle triangle, so we will label it. So we put our capital letters on the corners, and then across from each capital letter, we put the matching lowercase letter. So across from big C is little c, and that's the one we're looking for. Then across from big A will be lowercase a, and across from capital B is lowercase b. So now we need to write out our equation. So we're looking for a side, and we're looking for side C. So we can just use this right here. So I'm just going to write it all out. And now that we've labeled our triangle, filling in the equation isn't too bad. So we have little a is equal to 8, little b is equal to 11, 8, 11, cosine of 37. Now, if you have a double-lined calculator, and what I mean by that is a calculator that as you type in, it leaves everything along the top, I would highly recommend you type this in just like this, and you'll get an answer. It just reduces your chances for error. I'm going to go through and do all the steps just so you can see everything, and for those of you without a double-line calculator, you can see how I get to the final answer. So I'm just going to do BEDMAS. So I start with my exponents. So 8 squared is 64, 11 squared is 121, and then I do my multiplication. So for this part in my calculator, I'm just writing 2 times 8 times 11 times cos 37, and I will get 140.5598, and I'm just keeping decimals there because of that cosine, and just keeping decimals until the very end when I'll round it. And now we do our addition and subtraction. So we have 64 plus 121 minus 140.5598, and that will give us 44.44. Now, that is c squared, but I just need plain c. So I'm going to do that as I'm going to square root this side and square root this side. And I will get c, oops, not c squared, sorry, just c is equal to 6.7. And that is our final answer. And similarly to our sine law and our right angled triangles, we always want to take a look at that number and make sure it's in the same neighborhood as our other numbers. So 6 relative to 11 and 8 is relatively close. Okay, let's try the next one. So our other option for when we use cosine law is side, side, side. In other words, I have the length of all three sides, but I need to figure out one of the angles. So again, because it's a non-right angle triangle, we start by labeling our triangle. So we already have our angles labeled with capital letters, and now we need to put on the corresponding lowercase letters. So across from big A is little a, and that's a 9 there. It looks like an A, but it's a 9. Across from capital B is little b by this 5, and across from capital C is little c. Now I'm looking for an angle, so I'm going to be using this formula here. And I'm looking for C, so I can leave it just as it is. And I'm just going to write out my formula. So my cosine of C is equal to A squared plus B squared minus C squared all over 2AB. And seems like a complex formula, but the more you write it out, all of a sudden you'll realize you've started to memorize it a little bit, and there's some patterns that happen with it. Okay, so now that we've labeled our triangle, filling in the values is pretty straightforward. So little a is 9, little b is 5, little c is 8, all over 2 times 9 times 5. And again, if you have a double line calculator, I would do my best to put as much of this in as possible. But I'm going to go through all the steps just so you can see where everything comes from. So our cosine of C is equal to 81 plus 25 minus 64. And just to be clear with this guy here, this is minus 8 squared. So you can write it like that if you want, but you may need to put it in your calculator like this, just so your calculator understands what it's looking at. All right, and all of that is over 2 times 9 times 5, which is 90. And now I'm just going to simplify that numerator. 81 plus 25 minus 64 is 42 over 90. And I'm just going to change that into a decimal. So 42 divided by 90, which will give me 0.4667. Now, this number doesn't make sense for an angle, right? So that means there's something we have to do. And that reminds us that this is the cosine of C, not C. So we need to undo that cosine, and how we do that is we use our cosine inverse function on our calculator. So in my calculator, I'm just doing cosine inverse 0.4667, and I will get 62 degrees. There we go. So those are the two ways that we use cosine law. So we're going to do a few together just for extra practice. Okay, so for one, we want to find the value of sine b, and we're going to round to the nearest tenth. So let's start by labeling our triangle. So we have our capital letters on our angles, and across from capital A is little a, across from capital C is little c, and across from capital C is little b. Sorry, across from capital B. And we're looking for little b. So we know we're looking for a side, but if I look at my equations here, the equation is written for C, and the letters don't matter. The way to think of it is I have the side I'm looking for is equal to the square of my other two sides times 2 times my other two sides and cos of the angle I'm looking for. So it gets a little tricky. If you're just starting and you're really confused, you can relabel this so that the side we're looking for is C, but long term you need to get comfortable filling it in differently. So we're looking for B, and I'm going to show you how I switch the letters. So b squared is equal to the squares of the other two sides minus 2 times those sides again, and then cosine of our angle B. And once I have that, I can fill in all my values. So b squared is equal to 5 squared plus 4 squared minus 2 times 5 times 4 cosine of 35. And then we just plug all that into our calculator. And you'll get that b squared is equal to 8.2. And then just to get b, not b squared, we have to square root both sides. And we will get b equals 2.9. And that is our final answer. So let's do another one where, again, we have to change up the letters because I think that's the toughest part about this whole thing. So now we want to find the value of side y round to the nearest tenth. So first thing we do is we label our triangle. So our angles are labeled with capital letters. So here we have X, Y, and Z. And now we label our sides. So little x is across from capital X, little z is across from capital Z, and then little y is across from capital Y. And we're looking for that little y. So again, we're looking for a side. So little y squared is equal to my other two sides squared minus 2 times my other sides and the cosine of the same letter. So now let's fill in those values. Y squared equals 9 squared plus 8 squared minus 2 times 9 times 8 cosine of 25. And I'm just going to put that all into my calculator. We will get y squared is equal to 14.5. And now just to get y all by itself, we're going to square root both sides, and we will get that y equals 3.8. Okay, so I'm going to leave 3 for you to try on your own, and then I'm going to post it on Classroom. In the meantime, let's do 4 together, just because we haven't done one with finding an angle and different letters. So similarly, we're going to be using our angle formula, which I'll scroll up for a moment to refresh your memory. Is this one on the right, sorry. But wherever we see a C, we're going to put an H, and then A and B will be my other two letters. So we're looking for H, and now we need to label our triangle. So little h is across from capital H, little I is across from capital I, and little g is across from capital G. Now we're looking for H. So in your formula, wherever you see a capital C, we're going to put a capital H. And wherever we see a little c, we'll put a little h. The other two sides can be interchanged. So we'll have I squared plus g squared minus little h squared all over to ig. And once we have that written out, we can just fill in our values. So little I is 5 squared plus 4 squared minus 6 squared all over 2 times 5 times 4. And I'm just going to simplify the numerator and the denominator. So my numerator, we get 5. And my denominator, we will get 40. And now I take 5 divided by 40 to make it a decimal. So cosine of h is equal to 0.125. But that is the cosine of h, and I just want h, so I need to undo that cosine. So I will get second cos 0.125 is 83 degrees. And that's our final answer. So try 3 on your own, see how it goes, and come check your answer. And then there's some homework practice questions for you to do too.